While the world's attention was fixed on the factory floors of Vietnam, a much larger shift was happening in silence. In the last 12 months, India's weapons exports didn't just grow, they accelerated, hitting a record $4.7 billion. That is a 63% jump in a single year. Analysts have spent years debating whether India could beat Vietnam at manufacturing assembly. They were asking the wrong question. These two nations aren't competing. They are being deployed at different layers of a new global order. The break between Washington and Beijing is no longer a trade dispute. It is a permanent redesign of the global system. In early 2025, the trade volume between the world's two largest economies dropped by nearly 29%. Tariffs that began at 10% escalated to 145% in less than 90 days. Even after a truce, the baseline remained at a punishing 30%. Washington stopped asking who it preferred. It started asking who it could not afford to lose. And that logic now dictates that the entire Western supply chain must be physically removed from Chinese soil. This is the moment we predicted in our dollar weaponization series. The US is no longer just freezing assets. It is using supply chain access as its primary geopolitical lever. Logic over loyalty. Security is now the price of entry into the global dollar system. When Washington asked, if not China, then who, it was not one question. It was two separate questions being asked by two different rooms. The trade desk asked, who can assemble products fast enough to replace Chinese factories? The Pentagon asked, who can manufacture components we will never allow to be made in a country running Huawei infrastructure? Vietnam answered the first question perfectly. India was the only country capable of answering the second. These are not competing answers. They are consecutive decisions made in different buildings in Washington, and they explain everything that has happened since. To understand what Washington actually decided and why Beijing has no answer for it, you have to look at the triangle nobody is drawing clearly. Voice on Pages decodes the decisions that move capital, reshape borders, and rewrite the rules of global power. If this is your first time here, this channel is for people who want to understand the system, not just the headlines. Vietnam is the speed layer. It is fast, efficient, and proven. In 2024 alone, it realized over $25 billion in foreign direct investment. But it has limits. Vietnam still leans on Chinese infrastructure for its 5G networks. While it anchors its core systems in the West, it is an assembly hub, not a security partner. India is the security layer, a nuclear-armed democracy with a legal system built for long-term capital depth. While Vietnam got the assembly jobs, India got the critical nodes. Between April 2024 and mid-2025, India approved nearly $19 billion in semiconductor investments across 10 major projects. This includes the $2.75 billion Micron facility in Gujarat. It's actually already operational as of late February, shipping out its first modules to firms like Dell. And Tata's $11 billion fab in Dalera, targeting commercial operations by the end of the decade. China tried to slow this down. In late 2024, Beijing banned the export of gallium and germanium to the US. But this move backfired. Instead of slowing Washington, it forced the US to accelerate India's roadmap by 5 years. India is no longer just a developing market. It is an $800 billion export powerhouse, balancing merchandise and services at $400 billion each. This level of economic gravity makes New Delhi the anchor for a new, non-aligned security architecture. Here is the distinction that most analysts are still missing. Vietnam's $25 billion in annual FDI is real. It is proven. Apple, Samsung, Intel, they are all there. But Vietnam's legal system cannot protect the intellectual property inside a weapons system. Its domestic market cannot force a local supply chain to develop around advanced components. And its government cannot offer the one thing that now determines where serious capital goes: geopolitical certainty. India has all three. The US is not choosing between India and Vietnam. It is using Vietnam for what Vietnam is genuinely world-class at, and reserving India for the layer that Vietnam was structurally never designed to serve. The clearest proof of this architecture is not in a spreadsheet. It is in the weapons queue. For the first time, a developing nation is manufacturing high-end systems that US allies are lining up to buy. In March 2026, Indonesia confirmed a $440 million deal for the BrahMos missile system. This follows the $375 million contract with the Philippines, which saw its first deliveries in 2024. These aren't just transactions. They are the first signs of a major security architecture shifting toward New Delhi. India has become the only nation outside the West producing these specific systems at scale, and the queue is still forming. Vietnam, the same country that built Southeast Asia's fastest assembly economy, is now in final negotiations to buy Indian weapons systems worth approximately $700 million. Think about what that means. The speed layer is buying security from the security layer. The architecture is working exactly as Washington designed it. The numbers tell the real story of this transformation. In 2014, India's defense exports were worth just 686 crore rupees, approximately $74 million. By 2026, that figure has climbed to over 38,000 crore, roughly approximate $4.5 billion to $4.6 billion. That is a 34-fold increase in just 11 years. But the most important part of that stat is the pace. 63% of that entire growth happened in the last 12 months alone. The question is no longer whether India can manufacture. What happens when the world's largest democracy becomes its new arsenal? Here is the question this data forces you to sit with. If Vietnam is the speed layer and India is the security layer, what happens to the global balance of power the moment India solves the speed problem too? Drop your answer below. Vietnam got the jobs. India got the strategy, and both are now indispensable parts of a map that no longer includes Beijing. Because in the end, capital doesn't have loyalty, it has logic. Steve, signing off.